Hey, listening squirrels, I think I found us a good one. This is called, and it's in public domain, The Upper Berth by F. Marion Crawford. And here's a little bit about the dude who wrote this. About F. Marion Crawford. Francis Marion Crawford was a prolific American writer. He was born in Italy in, I can't say that, Bagna di Lucca. I'm sure I screwed that up. Italy on August 2nd, 1854, and was the only son of the American sculptor Thomas Crawford and Louisa Cutler Ward. Oh, forgot to put my light on. Hey, that's better. He spent much of his childhood traveling between America and Italy, but when he was old enough to choose for himself, he chose to spend most of his time in Italy, the country where many of his acclaimed novels are set. Although much of his work was romantic fiction, F. Marion Crawford also wrote a number of short horror stories. He died of a heart attack at Sorrento, Italy on Good Friday in 1909. Okay, this is about the story. About the Upper Berth. The Upper Berth is a short story set on an ocean liner where the evening's conversation has turned to the subject of ghosts. One of the passengers, Brisbane, has a rather chilling tale to tell. It concerns his last ever crossing on the Kamchatka. Brisbane slept on the lower berth in room 105, and something rather nasty had the berth above him. He has never traveled on the Kamchatka since. In an essay entitled Why I Write Ghost Stories, the English writer H. Russell Wakefield, who was born in 1888 and died in 1964, stated the Upper Berth is the very best of this type of story, and it remains popular to this day. It has been dramatized numerous times, and it's often included in ghost story anthologies. So here we go. The Upper Berth. Somebody asked for the cigars. We had talked long and the conversation was beginning to languish. The tobacco smoke had got into the heavy curtains. The wine had gotten into those brains which were liable to become heavy. And it was already perfectly evident that, unless somebody did something to rouse our oppressed spirits, the meeting would soon come to its natural conclusion, and we, the guests, would speedily go home to bed and most certainly to sleep. No one had said anything very remarkable. It may be that no one had anything very remarkable to say. Jones had given us every particular of his last hunting adventure in Yorkshire. Mr. Tompkins of Boston had explained at elaborate length those working principles by the due and careful maintenance of which the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad not only extended its territory, increased its departmental influence, and transported livestock without starving them to death before the day of actual delivery, but also had for years succeeded in deceiving those passengers who bought its tickets into the fallacious belief that the corporation aforesaid was really able to transport human life without destroying it. Signor Tombola had endeavored to persuade us by arguments which we took no trouble to oppose, that the unity of his country in no way resembled the average modern torpedo, carefully planned, constructed with all the skill of the greatest European arsenals, but when constructed, destined to be directed by feeble hands into a region where it most undoubtedly explode, unseen, unfeared, and unheard, into the illimitable waste of political chaos. It is unnecessary to go into further details. The conversation had assumed proportions which would have bored Prometheus on his rock, which would have driven Tantalus to distraction, and would have impelled Ixion to seek relaxation in the simple but instructive dialogues of Herr Ollendorf. Rather than submit to the greater evil of listening to our talk, we had sat at table for hours. We were bored, we were tired, and nobody showed signs of moving. Somebody called for cigars. We all instinctively looked towards the speaker. Brisbane was a man of 35 years of age, and remarkable for those gifts which chiefly attract the attention of men. He was a strong man. The external proportions of his figure presented nothing extraordinary to the common eye, though his size was above the average. He was a little over 6 feet in height and moderately broad in the shoulder. He did not appear to be stout, but on the other hand he was certainly not thin. His small head was supported by a strong and sinewy neck. His broad muscular hands appeared to possess a peculiar skill in breaking walnuts without the assistance of the ordinary cracker. And seeing him in profile, one could not help remarking the extraordinary breadth of his sleeves and the unusual thickness of his chest. He was one of those men who are commonly spoken of among men as deceptive. That is to say, that though he looked exceedingly strong, he was in reality very much stronger than he looked. Of his features I need say little. His head was small, his hair is thin, his eyes are blue, his nose is large. He has a small mustache and a square jaw. Everybody knows Brisbane, and when he asked for a cigar, everybody looked at him. "It's a very singular thing," said Brisbane. Everybody stopped talking. Brisbane's voice was not loud, but possessed a peculiar quality of penetrating general conversation and cutting it like a knife. Everybody listened. Brisbane, perceiving that he had attracted their general attention, lit his cigar with great equanimity. "It is very singular," he continued, "that thing about ghosts. People are always asking whether anybody has seen a ghost. I have." "Bosh! What, you don't mean to say so, Brisbane? Well, for a man of his intelligence." A chorus of exclamations greeted Brisbane's remarkable statement. Everybody called for cigars, and Stubbs the butler suddenly appeared from the depths of nowhere with a fresh bottle of dry champagne. The situation was saved. Brisbane was going to tell a story. "I'm an old sailor," said Brisbane, "and as I have to cross the Atlantic pretty often, I have my favorites. Most men have their favorites. I have seen a man walk in a Broadway bar for 3/4 of a mile for a particular car which he liked. I believe the barkeeper made at least 1/3 of his living by that man's preference. I have a habit of waiting in certain ships when I'm obliged to cross that duck pond. It may be a prejudice, but I was never cheated out of a good passion but once in my life. I remember it very well. It was a warm morning in June, and the custom house officials who were hanging about waiting for a steamer already on her way up from the quarantine. Presently a peculiar hazy and thoughtful appearance. I had not much luggage, I never have. I mingled with the crowd of passengers, porters, and officious individuals in blue coats and brass buttons who seemed to spring up like mushrooms from the deck of a moored steamer to obtrude their unnecessary services upon the independent traveler. I have often noticed with a certain interest the spontaneous evolution of these fellows. They are not there when you arrive. 5 minutes after the pilot has called, "Go ahead," they, or at least their blue coats and brass buttons, have disappeared from deck and gangway as completely as though they had been consigned to that locker which tradition ascribes to Davy Jones. But at the moment of starting, they are there, clean-shaved, blue-coated, and ravenous for fees. I hastened on board. The Kamchatka was one of my favorite ships. I saw was, because she emphatically no longer, I say was. That's what it's supposed to be. I say was because she emphatically no longer is. I cannot conceive of any inducement which could entice me to make another voyage in her. Yes, I know what you're all going to say. She's uncommonly clean in the run aft. She has enough bluffing off in the bows to keep her dry, and the lower berths are most of them double. She has a lot of advantages, but I won't cross in her again. Excuse the digression. I got on board. I hailed a student whose red nose and redder whiskers were equally familiar to me. 105, lower berth, said I, in a businesslike tone peculiar to men who think no more of crossing the Atlantic than taking a whiskey cocktail at a downtown Delmonico's. The steward took my portmanteau, I guess that's like luggage, greatcoat and rug. I shall never forget the expression on his face, not that he turned pale. It is maintained by the most eminent divines that even miracles cannot change the course of nature. I have no hesitation in saying that he did not turn pale, but from his expression I judged that he was either about to shed tears, to sneeze, or to drop my portmanteau. As the latter contained 2 bottles of particularly fine old sherry presented to me for my voyage by my old friend Snigginson Van Pickens, I felt extremely nervous, but the steward did none of these things. Well, said he in a low voice, and led the way. I suppose my Hermes, as he led me to the lower regions, had a little grog, but I said nothing and followed him. 105 was on the port side, well, aft. There was nothing remarkable about the stateroom. The lower berth was like most of those upon the Kamchatka. The lower berth, like most, was double. There was plenty of room. There was the usual washing apparatus, calculated to convey an idea of luxury to the mind of a North American Indian. There were the usual efficient racks of brown wood, which is more easy to hand a large size umbrella than the common toothbrush of commerce. Upon the uninviting mattresses were carefully bolted together. Maybe he means bolted together. I don't know. Those blankets, which is a great modern humorist has aptly compared to cold buckwheat cakes. The question of towels was left entirely to the imagination. The glass decanters were filled with a transparent liquid faintly tinged with brown, but from which an odor less faint, but not more pleasing, ascended to the nostrils like a tar off seasick remnants of oiling machinery. Sad-colored curtains half closed the upper berth. The hazy June daylight shed a faint illumination upon the desolate little scene. Ugh, how I hate that stateroom. The steward deposited my traps and looked at me as though he wanted to get away, probably in search of more passengers and more fees. It's always a good plan to start in favor with those functionaries, and I accordingly gave him certain coins there and then. I'll try and make you comfortable all I can, he remarked as he put the coins in his pocket. Nevertheless, there was a doubtful intonation in his voice which surprised me. Possibly his scale of fees had gone up, and he was not satisfied, but on the whole I was inclined to think that, as he himself would have expressed it, he was the better for a glass. I was wrong, however, and did the man injustice. And that's all of chapter 1. So we'll stop there and be on chapter 2 tomorrow. I know it's a little wordy like most that were of this time period, but I think it's going to get good. I peeked ahead a little bit, so I hope you enjoyed that little bit of reading. It wasn't a whole lot, but 15 minutes. I hope you got a little something out of it, and we'll be on chapter 2. It's called the Upper Berth. So see you tomorrow with another reading. Bye-bye. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Love y'all. Bye-bye.